In the Dharma expanse Palakasavakanishtas, the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya, I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion, and please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now I would like to say good evening to all of you listening to this in Malaysia on the second day of the Wesak program. And also to everyone else who is listening, whatever time of the day it is for you. It's evening for you as you listen, it's day for me, and this is just how it works in the world. In any case, we now have some time together to think about the Dharma, to listen to the Dharma, and to take this opportunity, this month of Wesak, to remember the Buddha, to commemorate the Buddha by speaking about his teachings. And so when we're thinking about the teachings of the Buddha, we have to remember that the Buddha is a Buddha because of arousing bodhicitta. And so at the beginning of whatever we do, whether it's a teaching, whether it's individual practice, whether it is anything else that we do, we should always try to remind ourselves of bodhicitta at the beginning and make sure that everything we do become a cause for us to eventually achieve Buddhahood and truly become able to help all sentient beings. So please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. And the Dharma that we are listening to today is I'm continuing with the string of pearls, the Dharma talks of Gampopa. As I mentioned yesterday, this is a collection of about 20 different talks that Gampopa gave to all of his students who were mostly great meditators. And so they would gather around. Gampopa would give the talk, and his students would take notes on the talk and later write down his words. And so there are several different collections of talks, Dharma talks by Gampopa. And this one, A String of Pearls, was compiled by his nephew, Gonsul. And so we went through the first two talks yesterday. The first talk spoke about how we need to meditate on impermanence, the defects of samsara, and then relative and ultimate bodhicitta. Then we spoke about the second talk spoke about how we need to have the preparation, main practice, and follow through in everything we do. And so now we've come to the third talk, and the third talk primarily talks about how we need to make sure that all the actions we do are for the benefit of all sentient beings and that we do everything with bodhicitta. And so as I did yesterday, I am going to first read the talk, and then I'll go through and speak about it, explain a few of the things in the talk. So to read the talk. As for the Dharma, I would like to share with you all. You must practice the path of both accumulation and purification. Gathering the accumulations and purifying obscurations are important. This life is like lightning in the sky, so you do not know when you will disappear and go. It is important to plant in the depths of your heart the thought that nothing at all is of any use, and to meditate on relative and ultimate bodhicitta. The meditation on death and impermanence is important because it leads to relative bodhicitta. Meditate on loving kindness and compassion by way of the faults of samsara. Then you must give up your own self-interest and do whatever you can for others' sake. In order to awaken to Buddhahood, in the beginning you need the wish to benefit sentient beings. In the middle, to awaken, you must act to benefit beings. Even at the end, once you have awakened, there is nothing to do but benefit beings. So meditating on relative bodhicitta is first meditating on death and impermanence, then meditating on the faults of samsara, and finally solely acting for the benefit of sentient beings with loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta. When meditating on ultimate bodhicitta, three things must come together: training from past lives, your own effort, and receiving the Guru's blessings. Without training in previous lives, the present precious human body with all 7 qualities of the high realms will not occur. That requires someone who is trained in gathering the accumulations in previous lives. But if you do not make effort, you will be left behind on the path of laziness and fail to achieve the noble path. If you do not receive the Guru's blessings, you will not develop any qualities at all, and nothing will come of you. Even if something does, it will disappear, and merit will be like water that has been shut off, as it is explained in the quote, "Without a Guru, there is no end to existence. A boat with no one at the helm will not reach the other side." Thus, first having training, practicing with your own effort, and following a qualified Guru are the ultimate samaya of the path of secret mantra. So keep this samaya assiduously. Merely knowing the words of the instructions does not help. It is like a parrot talking. The Gurus achieved siddha by practice, so we should also bless our beings through the devotion for the Gurus and practice their instructions properly. This will bring various signs of accomplishment. Naropa followed his Guru Tilopa for 12 years. He was so devoted to his Guru that, due to his dedication, even though Tilopa did not give any actual instructions, he did whatever the Guru said and developed various signs of accomplishment. Thus, when a qualified Guru and a receptive student come together, all the qualities can be accomplished in just an instant. First, peace and stability will come, then clarity and non-thought, and finally, remaining like the flow of a river within the space-like meaning, free of all elaborated predicates. As it says in the quote, "Perfect Buddhahood in one instant, a single moment makes the difference." Thus, only having faith and practicing meditation are important. If you do not, when you use your arms as a pillow and can swallow nothing but water, nothing at all will help you, but the Dharma you have practiced. Thus, it is critical to put effort into practice. Starting right now, there is no Dharma but that. So here in this talk, Gampopa begins by talking about how we must practice the path of both accumulation and purification. So accumulation means, on an external level, accumulation means practicing the accumulation of merit, that is, habituating ourselves to do good things, and practicing the accumulation of wisdom, which means that by doing good things and practicing the Dharma, we develop wisdom. We also need to engage in purification, that is, purification of the obscurations, and that means to purify us of all our afflictions and karma and other obscurations. But another way of looking at karma is something that the Gyalwang Karmapa said on the second day of the 7 days prayers for the pandemic to subside. What the Karmapa said on that morning is that the point of gathering the accumulations and purifying the obscurations is to see what good qualities we have and what our weaknesses are in order to increase our good qualities and decrease our weaknesses. So what this means, I think, is that as we do good things, for example, as we engage in generosity, you see what your capacity to do good things is. As you practice discipline, maybe at first you're not certain you can keep a certain type of discipline, but then you find out that you have the capacity. You're seeing what your strengths are. You're seeing what you are able to do. Likewise, when we engage in activities that purify our obscurations, like making confessions, confessing our wrongs and downfalls, doing Vajrasattva practice, or so forth, when we're doing something that purifies our obscurations, then what happens is we become very aware of what those obscurations, what our downfalls and all faults are. And so by engaging in the practices that gather merit and wisdom, and by engaging in the practices that purifying our obscurations, we can actually see where we are and what we need to work at. And then we'll be able to know, oh, I need to do this to increase my good qualities. I need to do this to eliminate my bad qualities and eliminate my weaknesses. And so that's the point of engaging in Dharma practice. The point is that our beings are malleable. We can do something to ourselves. We aren't stuck as a single person. You may feel like you are either lazy, or you might feel like you are someone who always gets angry. You might feel like someone who's too attached or too envious. And yet, I think if we engage in Dharma practice and look at ourselves and where we actually are, we'll see that none of those are actually parts of our own nature. And because they're not, we can eliminate them. Likewise, we'll be able to see what we're actually able to do, develop our qualities, develop ourselves. And so that is the point of the accumulation of merit and purification of obscurations. And these are like the essence of the Mahayana path. But we only have a short time to do that in this lifetime. Because as Gampopa says, this life is like lightning in the sky, so you do not know when you will disappear and go. And so for that reason, because we don't know how long we have in this lifetime, it means that if we're going to do anything, now while we have the chance, we have to do it now. We don't know what is going to happen next, so we have to take the opportunity we have now. And so for that reason, as Gampopa says, it is important to plant in the depths of your heart the thought that nothing at all is of any use, and to meditate on relative and ultimate bodhicitta. When we say that nothing is of any use, what we mean are no worldly things. None of the things we normally look to for comfort or for pleasure, or that we look to for giving ourselves status or gain or so forth. None of them are really important, and the reason they're not important is that even if they can help us in the short term of this lifetime, they're not going to help us for very long. This lifetime is short in comparison. So for that reason, they are not as not important. And once when we get to the moment of death, we don't know when that is going to be. When we get to that moment of death, if we have gathered the accumulations and purified our obscurations, then we'll have confidence, I've done something. And we'll know that we have taken the opportunity to move ourselves in a good direction. So we need to have that thought that spurs us to practice, and then we need to meditate on relative and ultimate bodhicitta. So how do you meditate on relative bodhicitta? Well, it means you have to start from the beginning. If you're going to meditate on relative and ultimate bodhicitta, you have to first of all realize that samsara is just by nature suffering. It says in so many different texts that samsara is like a pit of fire, it's suffering by nature, and so forth. And yet we often don't realize that. We don't really think about it. We don't realize how caught we are in samsara. And so we really have to think about the fact that the experiences we have in samsara are by nature painful. Painful experiences obviously are painful. Pleasant experiences change, and when they change and they're gone, then that is painful. And then there's just the underlying stress of it all, the pervasive suffering of formation. And so the nature of our life is impermanent and always changing. We always have to create things anew. We always are clinging to things, and this is difficult. It's a lot of mental stress and effort, and it only leads to further suffering. So it's important to first realize that, because if you do not realize that samsara is painful for yourself, then saying that you want to free other beings from samsara is a little bit, it's a difficult thing interesting idea. I'd like to free everyone else from samsara, but I'm going to stay here. I'm going to enjoy going to Starbucks. I'm going to enjoy eating durian. I'm going to enjoy time sitting on the beach. But I'm going to make sure that you all go off to Buddhahood, but I'm going to stay behind and enjoy samsara. It doesn't work that way. If you want to bring everyone else so that they're freed of suffering, and in particular, if you want to be able to do something effective to benefit sentient beings who at a time like this are suffering of sickness, or who are suffering of fear from the fear because of the coronavirus, then we have to do something to develop true quality so that we can act in the way that great beings such as the Dalai Lama and the Gyeowan Karmapa and the Sakya-Trizin and other great beings are all acting in order to benefit, to truly bring benefit to suffering beings. So we have to have the desire ourselves to become just like them, to become Buddhas ourselves. And so, and then once we meditate on relative bodhicitta, the relative bodhicitta naturally will break down our clinging to ourselves and others and then lead us to the realization of ultimate bodhicitta. So we have to start at the beginning. And as Gampopa says, The meditation on death and impermanence is important because it leads to relative bodhicitta. And then by that you realize the suffering of samsara, and then as you realize the suffering of samsara, that gives you loving kindness and compassion for all other sentient beings. Because you understand your own suffering, you understand that your own suffering is suffering, then you can see that other sentient beings are also suffering, and in that way you develop your loving kindness and your compassion, and as those grow, they naturally develop into bodhicitta. So what we need is we need to wish to benefit sentient beings. As Gampopa says, in the beginning you need the wish to benefit sentient beings. If you don't have that wish to benefit beings, you're not going to go through all the rigors of the path. In the middle, to awaken, you must act to benefit sentient beings. So as we are going along the path, what is the main practice of a bodhisattva? It's to bring benefit to sentient beings. Sometimes we do this in indirect manners, such as by engaging in meditation practice and reciting aspiration prayers on our own. Sometimes we do this in direct ways. We do engaged actions that help other sentient beings. But whatever we do, whether it be direct or indirect, we need to make the focus of what we do actually bringing benefit to sentient beings. And then at the end, once you've achieved Buddhahood, as Gampopa said, there is nothing to do but benefit beings. So from the time we begin practicing the Mahayana path until samsara is emptied, then there's nothing for us to do but to work towards benefiting sentient beings. At the beginning, when we don't have as much capacity, we work towards developing the capacity. And then once we have the capacity, we can gradually begin to actually do things to benefit sentient beings. And eventually, as we train, then we will come to a state where we can truly bring lasting benefit to sentient beings. And so therefore, we need to meditate on these three things. First, impermanence, then loving kindness and compassion, and then bodhicitta. And then as we meditate on relative bodhicitta, that also requires, when we have meditated on relative bodhicitta, eventually that brings us to realizing ultimate bodhicitta, but it's not automatic. We need three things. So Gampopa talks about three different things that we need to practice ultimate bodhicitta. That means practicing a meditation such as Mahamudra or Dzogchen, or to truly realizing the Madhyamaka, the middle way, or so forth. What we need for that is the three things. And so the first is training from past lives. The second is your own effort. And the third is receiving the Guru's blessings. So training from past lives, most of us, just by the fact that we're human, we already have obviously done a certain amount of training in the past lives, because we had not trained in the past lives, we would not have been born as humans. We would have been born as frogs or shellfish or in the hells or somewhere else. We wouldn't have been born in a position like this where we are able to benefit sentient beings. And not only that, most of us who are listening are born in positions where we're actually able to practice the Dharma. We have some causes and conditions that make it possible for us to actually hear these teachings. And so that's the first thing that we need. So we've done that in the past, and we have that now. Another thing is that we also have to make sure that we continue to do all of the training in this lifetime so that we'll be able to continue in future lifetimes. So that's training in past lives. And then the second thing we need is your own effort. If you don't work at it, you're not going to get anywhere. Otherwise, you're just going to be lazy. If you think, I could do it, but I'm going to wait, I'm going to enjoy myself, I'll sit by the side of the pool, go to the beach, then you're not going to get very far on the bodhisattva path if all you're doing is going to the beach. So that's the second thing. You actually have to work at it. You have to do the practices, engage in the contemplations, and so forth. And then the third thing we need is receiving the Guru's blessings. So here we're talking about the word blessings, and sometimes when we talk about the blessings of the Guru, we kind of get strange ideas of what blessings mean. We think that blessings mean that we're going to be have some sort of wave of energy come over, make us shake and tremble and so forth, and we're going to have this mystical experience because we've received the blessings of the Guru. We think that it is something that's very special and different. That's extraordinary experience that we're going to have. So we're looking for something that actually isn't going to happen. I mean, okay, in occasional cases it might happen, but that's not really what we mean by blessings. What we mean by blessings are, the Tibetan word is jinjilop. Jinjilop. So jin means like the power. In particular, it's the power to change. And it's through that power, and you lopa. And lopa, the word lopa here means also to change. So you change through that capacity to change something. It's kind of redundant when you translate it into English. In Tibetan, it doesn't sound as redundant. But basically what we're saying are the blessings are the power to change your mind. So when you go to a Dharma teaching, and you hear teachings by a guru, and they change the way you think, you say, oh, that's what it is. It may not be anything particularly special, but that is what we actually mean by a blessing. It's changing the way you're thinking. Or if you are to go to, an event, for the example that my own teacher, many of our teachers, Khenpo Rinpoche, the example that he often gives is that he's met many people who have just started on Dharma practice, and sometimes he asks them, what started you on your practice? And several of them have told him, I went to India, I was just a hippie, I went to India. I was just traveling in India and I heard about the Kala Chakra that the Dalai Lama was giving. And I thought I'd go and see what was going on. And there was something about it that changed me. Now, so that's something that changed them. That's what we mean by blessings. It's not like they had mystical experiences. It's not like they started levitating or their bodies started to tremble and shake. It's like something changed and they said, oh, there's something here I want to practice. So that's what we're looking for. And we get these blessings from the Guru because it's the Guru that teaches us the Dharma. The Dharma is what actually gives us change. And so we need the Guru. We need someone to teach us the Dharma. The Guru it's really only through our Gurus that we can learn, because we'd like to learn from the Buddha. The Buddha did appear on this earth. We're now celebrating the anniversary of the Buddha taking birth, achieving enlightenment, and passing away to nirvana, all in this 1 month of Vaisakha, of course in different years. So we're celebrating all the actions that he did, and we're celebrating the Dharma that he has done that has affected so many of our lives. And yet, because that happened over 2,600 years ago, we don't actually have the opportunity to hear the Dharma as the Buddha taught it. We don't have the ability to go to teachings. We can go to Kala Chakra empowerments by the Dalai Lama. We can go to teachings by Khenpo Rinpoche. We can we can participate in the prayers for the pandemic to subside with the Gyalwang Karmapa. And all of these are things we can do where we can receive the Dharma teachings. And we cannot receive the teachings directly from the Buddha. And yet, it doesn't make a difference, because we can get all the teachings. We can get the teachings from the Dalai Lama, from the Gyalwang Karmapa, from Trungpa Rinpoche, from all of the other masters, and we are able to practice the path for that reason. And so that's why we need the Guru. But we also need a Guru because we don't know what we're doing. We don't know where we're going, what we're supposed to do. We have no idea. If we already knew what we are supposed to do, we'd already be Buddhas. But we aren't Buddhas. So we don't know what we're supposed to be doing, and therefore we need to follow the instructions of a Guru. So that is why Gampopa cites this quote here: without a Guru, there is no end to existence. A boat with no one at the helm will not reach the other side. So if you just sit in a boat and there's no ferryman, no person at the oars, no one to steer the boat, no one at the rudder, then the boat's not going to go anywhere. It's going to carry you off downstream. You won't get to the other side of the river. So we need a Guru who is experienced. Just like when you have a boat, you need to have someone who knows how to steer the boat, how to pilot the boat, so you can safely get to the other side. Similarly, we need someone who knows what to do to guide people. And so that is why we need the Gurus. So we need to receive the teachings from the Gurus, receive the blessings from the Gurus, and yet we can't just leave it as mere words. As Gampopa says, merely knowing the words of the instructions does not help. It is like a parrot talking. So this is what reminds me of what the Gyalwang Karmapa often speaks about in his teachings in terms of needing to develop experience, needing to develop feeling. You have to have a feeling for what's going on. We have to look at the situations of our lives, look at the nature. We have to engage in the study and the contemplation and the practice to really examine ourselves and see what we are, what our experience really is. And then when you have that experience, then you will actually be able to make progress. Otherwise, if we just learn the Dharma as if we were learning a series of lists, as if we were just memorizing words, as if we were just learning prayers from memory that we are going to recite, and they come and it goes out the mouth without ever affecting our heart, then it's better than nothing, of course. It's pretty good compared to what we could be doing, but it's not what's going to really be effective for moving us down the path. So it's really important for us to actually have that feeling that we're actually practicing the Dharma, that we're really trying to incorporate the Dharma in our being, truly change ourselves at a fundamental level instead of just at the outer level. We can go to Dharma centers, or usually we can go to Dharma centers, and hopefully sometime we will be able to go back to Dharma centers and we can go and do pujas. We can ring bells and we can do all of that. And when we're doing so, we have to remember that doing all of that is a method. It's something that we do in order to make it possible for us to look inside, see what our strengths are, see what our weaknesses are, and then change ourselves for the better. And so for that reason, we need to make sure to actually devote ourselves to the Guru, to the teachings of the Guru. And the reason for doing this is that we have a great opportunity to do it right now in this lifetime. We have to have faith that by practicing, have faith in the teachings, have faith in ourselves. And when we have that faith and we practice meditation, if we do this, then at the end of our lives, whenever that will be, whether it be tomorrow or in 20 years or in 100 years, if we do not, then as Gampopa says, if you do not, when you use your arms as a pillow and can swallow nothing but water, so when you're lying on your deathbed, if you're lucky enough to have a bed, or if you have to lie down someplace on the ground and with your arms as your pillow, and when you can swallow no food and the only thing you can take is just a drop or two of water, then nothing at all will help you but the Dharma you have practiced. So if we take this opportunity now to practice the Dharma, to do something to change ourselves, to make ourselves better people, to move down the path of the Bodhisattva, to truly have and to truly develop bodhicitta, then that's something that will truly be of benefit for us, not only at the time of death, but also beyond. So thus it is critical to put effort into practice starting right now. There is no Dharma but that. So that is the first of the talks by Gampopa that I would like to speak about today. And then the second talk I'm going to read first. This is a talk primarily about developing loving kindness and compassion. So to read the talk. As for the Dharma, I would like to share with you all. To truly practice Dharma, you must know that there is no time in this life. It is important to meditate with a great sense of urgency on loving kindness and compassion. There are 3 ways to rouse these 2, focusing on sentient beings, focusing on dharmas, and without a focus. The first is rousing loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta by focusing on sentient beings. This means focusing on sentient beings who, not having realized suchness, have the suffering of dualism and contemplating the thought, if only sentient beings could be freed of suffering, encounter happiness, and achieve perfect Buddhahood. Then, in everything you do, no matter what, do not act out of your own desires. Instead, act for the sake of sentient beings, our lords. It is because of sentient beings, our lords, that we will awaken to completely perfect Buddhahood. So it is important to focus on sentient beings. It is impossible to develop liberation and omniscience if you have given up on a sentient being. Thus, loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta that focus on sentient beings are paramount. You should treasure them highly. Rousing bodhicitta focused on dharmas means taking everything you do as a dream or illusion, because all phenomena are dreams and illusions. As the quote says, with illusory phenomena, by meditating there illusory, you'll reach illusory Buddhahood. Once you know that all phenomena are like dreams and illusions, then since hatred is not established, hatred will be liberated on its own. Similarly, when you know that all attachment and aversion are like dreams and illusions, your mind will not engage in any attachment or aversion. When you practice all activities, such as lying down or sitting, as being dreamlike and illusory, the apprehension of appearances as true will collapse without any difficulty. Through practicing that, you will have no difficulty in achieving the Supreme Siddhi in this life. This is what is called bodhicitta, focused on dharmas. Bodhicitta, without a focus, is practicing the meaning that is devoid of all elaborated predication and that is not established as the essence of anything. For all those who have realized that meaning, there is no way to feel anything but compassion for sentient beings who are like deer caught in a snare. If you have not realized it, as Guru Atisha said, when you practice in such a manner, the experience free of coming and going, free of elaborations of meditation and meditator, it will come. These are the three ways to rouse loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, so practice in this way. So here, in this talk, Gampopa is talking about three ways to develop loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta. So we have these three qualities: loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta. So the first thing we have to actually consider is when we talk about developing loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, what are we talking about? Because if we don't know what we're talking about, then we won't be able to develop them. So we have to identify what loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta are first. So if we start with bodhicitta, bodhicitta is like the wish to achieve Buddhahood, and realizing that all sentient beings are experiencing such tremendous suffering in samsara that there's no true way to help them, to give them lasting benefit, except to bring them to the state of Buddhahood. For example, we can think about it in the current situation, the current pandemic. If we have someone who is suffering from the COVID disease, they're experiencing a terrible fever, terrible pains, they're having trouble, difficulty, and so forth, then of course we have to do something to help that sentient being. We have to do something to relieve them of their immediate suffering as much as we can. If we have medical training, we do what we can. We try to help get the medical treatment if possible. We must do what we can to help people who are suffering in this situation. And yet, at the same time, when we treat someone who has a disease such as this and they recover, their recovery is good, it's excellent, it gives them a respite, they're cured, they're happy, they're healthy for a time. And yet, eventually, this lifetime is going to pass away. So any benefit we give these beings is true and real benefit and should not be denigrated. And yet we have to look at it in comparison. And in that comparison, it is only a temporary benefit compared to Buddhahood. So we have to have that wish. And in addition to helping people as much as we can in the short term, we also, at the same time as we are helping people who are suffering from the COVID disease, at the same time as we are helping people who are suffering because they have lost their jobs, we're giving food to people who have no more food, providing other care to other sentient beings, and we're consoling people who are distraught, helping people with their anxiety. At the same time as we do that, as Buddhists, we also need to have the thought, by doing this, may I also help bring this being to Buddhahood? And if we do that, then that action of helping that sentient being now also becomes an action of bodhicitta. So that bodhicitta is, I want to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood. In order to bring Buddhahood, I need to achieve, in order to bring others to Buddhahood, I need to achieve that state myself. So that is bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta. But in order to have relative bodhicitta, we have to have compassion. Because if you don't see the suffering of all sentient beings, if you don't appreciate the fact that sentient beings are suffering, then you aren't going to want to help the other sentient beings. And so we have to have this compassion, and it has to be all across the board. Everyone, We have to have that for all sentient beings, none accepted. It has to be impartial compassion for all sentient beings. So that is actually kind of difficult. So we need to, but we need to develop that compassion where we want to free all sentient beings from every suffering. And in order to have that desire to free them from suffering, we first have to love those beings. We first have to have the quality of loving kindness. If you don't have loving kindness, you aren't going to care. If there is someone who gets sick from COVID and you think, oh, it doesn't matter, I don't know them, that's because you don't care about that person. But if you have a feeling of affection for that person, now that person, the person who's suffering from the COVID disease might have been a horrible person up to this point. They might have been someone who's killed and lied and stolen or done all sorts of things, someone who always talked badly about people, spoke divisively, gossiped, and so forth. They might have been a person who, on any worldly level, we'd say that is not an admirable sort of person. That is not a good person. And yet, that person who's not a good person is still experiencing suffering. So in order to feel compassion for all sentient beings, we have to be able to feel love for even those beings whom we don't like at this point. We have to realize, people who would normally be considered horrible people also, we have to also be able to include them in our loving kindness and compassion. As Gampopa says, we must not give up even on any sentient beings. And when we talk about giving up on any sentient beings, what that means is that we must not even give up on one sentient being. Of course, there are sentient beings who are just beyond the pale. There is nothing. Some people are just too caught up in their own delusions that to be able to be helped. There's no way you can help them. They're so caught up in their anger, their desire, and so forth. There's nothing we can do to help that particular being now. And yet, instead of saying, what a horrible person, I'm never going to help them, what we should think to ourselves is, I may not be able to help that person now, but I make the aspiration that in the future I shall be able to help that person. And if you do that, then you haven't given up on that person. So we need to have that sense of loving kindness. And when we talk about loving kindness, what is that actually when we're talking about? You have to have love for sentient beings. Well, this means that actually we need to have the feeling for all sentient beings like a mother would have looking at her only child. If you have a baby, this mother has a new baby, and what does the mother feel for her baby? The mother feels love. The mother would do anything for her baby, anything to make her baby happy. She's just so delighted to have her mother. It's just like the heart melts. I think this also happens for fathers and other peoples too, but we always use the example of mothers. It's like when the mother is holding their baby, she feels the baby. What does she feel? That's the feeling of loving kindness. So we naturally feel loving kindness towards our babies, towards our children. We feel it often towards our parents, towards our friends. So what we have to do is we have to take that quality of loving kindness that we have, that we already feel for some people. Then we have to bring it so we can look at all people in such a way that we will be able to feel that same loving kindness for all sentient beings. This doesn't come immediately. You have to take it by stages. Traditionally, especially in the Theravada tradition, but a little bit in the Tibetan tradition, especially in the Theravada tradition, they talk about starting meditating on loving kindness for yourself, wishing yourself be happy, feeling love for yourself, and then you meditate for someone such as your mother, who is easy to meditate for, and then you take it out in stages to friends, then to neutral people, and then to challenging people who are often, traditionally they're called your enemies. To challenging people, and then you meditate upon loving kindness for all the different people. And you don't go through this quickly. You take your time at each step as you go through each step of the way so that you can truly, genuinely feel love for your mother, for your friends, for neutral people, people whom you don't really know, people you see, you recognize, but you don't really have any feeling for who they are. And then you get to the challenging people or the enemies, and then you keep meditating on loving kindness until you can even feel the same loving kindness for your enemy as you feel for your mother. And you go through this in stages. Sometimes you get to one stage and it's difficult, and what that often means is actually you haven't trained in the previous stages quite enough. So you go back a step, And you train with, if you're having trouble with the neutral people, then you go back and you train a little bit more with your friends, and then you move on to the neutral people. And then you can try moving on to the challenging people. When if they're too challenging, you move back and you meditate on neutral people for a while, and then you meditate for your challenging people and enemies. And then once you feel like you can truly have real affection, spontaneous affection, even for people who are difficult, who may even be threatening you and causing you a hard time, giving you problems, either financial problems or threatening your life, however they're challenging or enemies, then you can move on to meditating on it for all sentient beings throughout space. So you go outwards until you can truly develop that feeling of affection and love for all sentient beings. And then when you have that feeling of love for all sentient beings, how do you know that you have enough love for sentient beings? Pao Tsula Trengwa, who was a 16th century Tibetan master, a student of the 8th Karmapa, said that the level of loving kindness we need to get to is where we have no thought of our own self-interest, even in our dreams. So that's actually a very high level. So right now we're not at that level. What we have to do is we have to train gradually. So you can do the formal meditations as I've described, or another thing you can do is whenever you go out, you can look at all sentient beings and remember how important they are to you. Here in this text, for example, Gampopa says, "Act for the sake of sentient beings, our lords. It is because of sentient beings, our lords, that we will awaken to completely perfect Buddhahood." So Gampopa calls sentient beings our lords. It's like we should look at them as being just like our gurus, just like the Buddhas, because it is only because of sentient beings that we are able to practice generosity. We wouldn't have anyone if there were no other sentient beings, there'd be no generosity. If there were no other sentient beings, there would be no practicing discipline. And so, if you're going to give up killing, if there are no other sentient beings whom you can refrain from killing, then of course you can't practice the discipline. It's like pointless to try to practice discipline if there are no other sentient beings. You can't go off in a cave and stay in a cave saying, "I'm practicing discipline, I'm practicing patience," and actually really be getting anywhere. You need to have other sentient beings to do any of the bodhisattva practices. So other sentient beings are incredibly important for us in our practice. They're incredibly important for us in this very life. It's only because of other sentient beings that we are able to live. Everything that we have, even down to the bare air that we breathe, comes about because of the actions of other sentient beings. And so were it not for them, we would not be alive. We are dependent upon them. And when we think about it, if we think about past lifetimes, we've had an infinite number of past lifetimes. Now, you don't have a mother in every lifetime, because in some lifetimes, if you're born in hell, you're just born miraculously in hell, and there's no mother there, and so there's no mother in that lifetime. But there are enough lifetimes where we have had mothers, that every single sentient being must have been our mother at least once. And when that sentient being was our mother, that being treated us with as much kindness as any mother will treat her children in this lifetime, as our own mothers must have treated us. And so we think about that. And so it's not just that we have any old connection. It's not like just some sort of a neutral connection. Yeah, there's some sort of web of life, and if you go 13 different links out on this web, you'll get to some other sentient being, and therefore we're connected, but it's not that close. That's not how it is. Actually, we are intimately connected with every other sentient being. We have to remember that they're all close to us, and it's only by remembering that, developing loving kindness for them, that then we can develop compassion. And then when we have that compassion, we'll begin to feel spontaneous bodhichitta. Now, this takes time. We have to train in it. You can't expect yourself to go from being an ordinary sentient being to being a Buddhahood overnight without training. You have to put the effort in. You have to try to train. This means that when you are engaging in your daily life, you try to look at other sentient beings and Remember that connection and feel that affection for them. Remind yourself of it. And as you remind yourself more and more, then naturally, it'll start to come naturally that you'll begin to see all sentient beings with loving kindness. Then once you do, you'll start to get a flavor of it. And that is just the beginning. Then you have to keep training until it's really deeply ingrained. Then once that happens, the compassion for suffering sentient beings will naturally come. And out of that compassion, as you look at the nature of things, you'll naturally develop bodhicitta. This is what we call loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta that are focused on a sentient being. So these are the three types of loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta that Gampopa talks about. Focused on sentient beings, focused on dharmas, and without a focus. So when we say that it's focused on a sentient being, that means that we think about sentient beings as we meditate on compassion. We think about their suffering as we meditate on compassion. We think about bringing them to Buddhahood as we meditate on bodhicitta. We're thinking about a sentient being. And this is really important. When you look at it, it sounds like, the other two types of sentient being, the other two types of loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta must be higher because they're more profound. They must be more important. But actually, it's not so, because you cannot develop them if you do not develop this loving kindness focused on a sentient being. So first, we must put all of our effort into developing this loving kindness focused on a sentient being. And then when you have that loving kindness focused on a sentient being, what that does is it naturally breaks down all of the barriers between us and other sentient beings so that we can begin to see the connections that we have with other beings. And as we see those connections, we realize that we're all related, we're all connected. It's like a big web, and we're all interconnected. And when we see that, we realize there's nothing real about any of it, that is all like dreams and illusions, as Gampopa says. When we meditate on bodhicitta in that way, that is meditating on bodhicitta focused on dharmas. That means that we look at everything that appears, the appearances of sentient beings, the appearances of ourselves, as being like a dream or illusion, something that comes together as a cause or a condition that we feel and we experience just as we experience things in dreams. And yet, if we woke up to Buddhahood, we'd realize it isn't any more real than what we experience in our dreams. And so that is meditating on bodhicitta, focusing on dharmas. And then when you keep meditating upon that, as you do the practice of a bodhisattva, eventually you realize emptiness, and at that point you can practice bodhicitta that is without a focus. And this means that you see that when you're looking at a sentient being, when you're looking at dharmas, the phenomena or the dreams and illusions, you realize that they are emptiness. There's nothing really there. Any ideas that we have about them are just merely ideas and have no substance. It is not established as the essence of anything, as Gampopa says. When you realize that, you realize the empty nature, the nature of interdependence. And at that point, you are freed, but at the same time, you can see that all other sentient beings, even though they actually are the same, have not realized that and therefore still experience suffering. And for that reason, someone who has that realization naturally feels compassion for other sentient beings. As Gampopa says, there is no way to feel anything but compassion for sentient beings who are like deer caught in a snare. And so these are the three ways to rouse loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta. So practice in this way. So here in this talk, what Gampopa has described, or how to meditate on loving kindness, that feeling of just pure love and affection for other sentient beings that makes us wish that they be happy. And then compassion, the wish that they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And then bodhicitta, the realization that the only way to free them from that suffering in a true and lasting manner is to bring them to Buddhahood. And so those are the three that we can practice in three ways, either focused on sentient beings, focused on dharmas, or focused or without a focus. So that is the talk that Gampopa gave. There is no dharma but that, he says. It's like these talks, they all end with this phrase. It's like this is all that we need to know, if we bring this idea into any practice we do, then it'll truly become the Dharma. And so that is, I think, enough for this talk now. And I would like to conclude by saying thank you to Lama Lodra from the Tranggu Dharma Society of Petaling Jaya, for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you during this celebration of Vesak, as well as to John Leung and all of the other members of the committee that actually did the work of organizing these talks. And I'd also like to thank Dungse Lama Pema and everyone at Tranggu Monastery, Canada, who have provided all of the facilities, this lovely setting for me to sit and speak in, and who have given all the kindly helped in producing these videos. So I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in making it possible for me to share some Dharma with you. But most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for listening, because were it not for you, and then, of course, I'm particularly thinking of all my friends in Malaysia, whom I've seen so many times over the years when I've been to Malaysia, when we've been on pilgrimages in Jambi or in Maratika, and I think of all of you. And the Dharma Center in PJ wouldn't be there without you. We could have a committee and we could have a lama, but with no people coming to the center, there would be, or no people participating in the center. I guess no one can come to the center, but we're going to keep it going anyways. But without anyone participating in the center, there'd be no reason to have a center. For myself, without anyone to have often done a lot of work as a translator, without anyone to translate for, there would be nothing for me to do. I'd have to get a job. So I'd like to express my great thanks to all of you, particularly from Malaysia, for your support over the years and for your attention now. And so I hope that we will all be able to meet again soon, and that in the meantime, that all of your Dharma practice and everything goes well. So I'd like to conclude this morning by dedicating the merit. We should think to ourselves that now we have had about an hour, a little less than an hour, I guess, that we've been speaking about the Dharma, listening to the Dharma. And so please think to yourself, because we have spent this time thinking about, listening to the Dharma, may we be able to develop our own qualities, recognize our weaknesses, change ourselves for the better, develop loving kindness, compassion, and bodhichitta. And because of doing this, may we eventually be able to achieve Buddhahood and bring all sentient beings to that state. And in the meantime, may we be able to bring temporary benefit to all other sentient beings. May we also dedicate this in particular, the merit of this teaching and practice. May we dedicate it in particular so that all sentient beings who are suffering because of the pandemic, whether they have taken ill, whether they are suffering the economic effects, whether they are mourning, whatever way it has affected them, let's please all make the aspiration that they may be relieved of their suffering, find happiness now in the short term, and that they be brought eventually to long-term happiness. And so please, thinking in this way, let us all recite the dedication of merit. Osanam de tam je se pani Tobne nye pedranam pamchene Gyegana chi balab trobai, 西北左 Bai 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 西北左